Now, as you'll be aware, over the past number of years, we've seen huge increases in the importance and priority placed on herd health, dairy herd health in particular at farm level. We've got a lot of new initiatives, and it would have been mainly started by the Teagasc Herd Health Research Initiative funded by the Dairy Levy, started in 2008. And as spin-outs from that and from various other organisations, we've had the development of Animal Health Ireland, and most recently we have the National BVD Eradication Scheme. So these are all happening very much at a national level, and I suppose what's of main importance for you here today as a farmer is what you really want to know is your particular herd at risk from diseases? And the easiest way for you to make an informed decision as to whether your herd is actually at risk from disease is to decide what's the likelihood of a disease occurring on your farm, but also what's the likely impact of that disease should it occur on your farm. So mostly what's controlling the likelihood of disease is how much of the particular disease is in the country, so the prevalence of the disease in the country. Also what kind of biosecurity measures you have in place on your farm to actually prevent disease coming in and spreading around your farm. And also there's the type of treatments and preventative measures that you put in place, such as vaccination and dosing. So it's very important for you to have as much information as possible on those three factors to decide what's the likelihood of the disease actually occurring. The next thing then you need to look at is what's the impact of the disease if it does come onto the farm. And impact can affect your animals in two ways. So obviously there's the impact on farm profitability from disease, but there's also an impact on the actual animal health and the welfare of the animals themselves on farm. So to actually quantify the risk of disease, you're pretty much multiplying the likelihood of the disease by the impact it will have when it comes onto the farm, and then you decide to prioritise your diseases then. Is it a disease that your herd is at high risk from, and are you going to prioritise that disease that you're going to put certain actions in place on your farm to help it out? So what you do then is devise a herd health plan to reduce your risk of disease coming. And in the actual Open Day booklet, I've put an example of a herd health plan that you might put together for a number of diseases. And they all involve putting some level of biosecurity in place, some diagnostic testing, and whatever your vaccination and dosing programme is for the particular disease that you're looking at. Now, the most important thing to remember is you need to use the combined approach of the three. You may not necessarily have the same emphasis on the three of them. You might prioritise them and give a different emphasis depending on the type of disease. And on the second board over here, I'll actually prioritise these three things for some of the more important diseases in the country at the time. So again, like I say, very important to have the prioritised and combined approach. One thing to note on biosecurity, and the majority of this is about preventing disease introduction onto your farm. And one of the most important things you can do is operate a closed farm system, so you're not bringing animals onto the farm. And we did a survey in Teagasc fairly recently, and we asked farmers, just a national dairy population, to see was there, what proportion of the farmers felt that they had an open herd and what percent had a closed herd. And we had 32% of farms saying that they had a closed herd, again minimising disease introduction. Unfortunately, when we actually checked the statistics against AIM data held by the Department of Agriculture, we found that this 32% figure, when we actually looked at animal movement onto the farm, only 12% of those farms were actually closed. So again, it's very, very important for you to properly characterise your farm, because then you can properly know what the disease risks are on your farm. So I'll quickly go through just 4 of the more important diseases in Ireland. So we have BVD, liver fluke as a parasitic disease, Riona's disease, bacterial disease, and IBR, again, another virus. So if we go back to the original concept of looking at the likelihood of a disease occurring by the impact of the disease, the likelihood of the disease occurring, Teagasc figures would show us that for dairy herds, we've about 95% of our dairy herds have been exposed to BVD, and possibly up to 40% of those actually have active infections. And recent figures from the National BVD Eradication Scheme would show that we have 0.7% of PIs in the country. So the most important thing, if we go back to our biosecurity, vaccination and testing, the most important thing to do for controlling BVD, and the first step that you will take, is testing and slaughtering. And again, a lot of that is being controlled by the BVD and National Eradication Scheme. What is absolutely critical at the moment is it's been recently made public that an average of 50% of PIs that have been identified since the start of the year have not been slaughtered off of farms, and they haven't been euthanized. Now, these animals can have massively deleterious effects on the farm that they're kept on. It is very, you may say that you have kept them in isolation. It is very difficult to isolate this virus on farm, and it can have detrimental effects Where it will be most detrimental is where you bring naive animals, animals that have been never exposed to BVD. If you're in the middle of herd expansion and you buy new heifers onto the farm, if they become exposed to this PI that you have retained on the farm, the consequences can be very, very expensive. So again, it's a very high-risk disease still, even though we do have a national eradication scheme in place. So testing and slaughtering first. Biosecurity plan, extremely important in terms of, especially if you're expanding and bringing animals in. And the third thing on your priority list is to vaccinate. So moving on to liver fluke, and again, we'll take liver fluke and IBR. Both of these have very, very high prevalences. So again, they would be deemed as high-risk diseases. For liver fluke, testing again to establish your herd status is very, very important. You then need to dose using an appropriate product, and that will very much depend on your diagnostics and what level of disease you think you have in the herd. Obviously, there's a mud snail involved in the liver fluke life cycle, so you want to minimise access of your dairy animals to snail habitat. And then you have your biosecurity plan, again, because you can actually purchase liver fluke and other parasites onto your farm. IBR, again, we've greater than 70% of herds infected, very high risk in terms of prevalence. But from the other diseases, we see that testing was very important. Here, if you're in an IBR outbreak scenario, vaccination is the most important and the first critical step that you take to stop full herd spread. After that, then you can actually go in and test your herd status and test for carriers. When you get to a stage that your vaccination program has reduced the number of carriers in the herd, you can cull these carriers when it becomes economically feasible. And again, you back all this up with your biosecurity plan. The last one I have here, and again, you'll see it's a much lower prevalence than the other diseases, but I've still classed it as high risk. And the main reason for that is in terms of the impact it has on the farm once it comes on. So again, figures from 2005, we've only approximately 25% of herds infected, but the impact in terms of both impact to cost of production on farm, but also impact nationally as a dairy industry on our sales abroad, this is a very, very high risk disease in terms of impact. Again, your strategy is to test individual animals. The best value group to test are those animals over 2 years of age. You have to isolate and cull positives because this is a notifiable disease. Calf management, extremely important, and this is calf management from birth is very, very important, and probably as important, continuous monitoring and biosecurity. So again, just to sum up, you've got 3 things that you need to put in your herd health plan: biosecurity, testing and vaccination and dosing. And again, you then decide, you make an informed decision based on prevalences, your biosecurity, what other things you have in place, and you use that to set up your prioritised list for different diseases, and that's your herd health plan sorted.